Night Train to Terror is a 1985 film directed by Schlossberg-Cohen and at least 3 other directors. The film was released to the home video market to capitalize on the demand for horror anthologies. Horror anthologies offer multiple stories for the price of one, a buffet of nightmares, if you will. But there's something in Night Train to Terror's construction that makes it stand out among its peers. This anthology happens to be built out of 3 feature films, none of which had found success, if they were even finished, in 1983, when Twilight Zone the movie and George Romero's Tales from the Dark Side TV series showed there was an appetite for terrifying short stories. Visto International had their unreleased movies condensed into 25-minute segments. They shot some extra footage and added a little breakdancing. So here's the framework for this anthology. A train races through the night, carrying an 80s dance crew to their final destination. While in the dining car, God and the devil are in the middle of a discussion about man's inherent spiritual worthiness. They discuss the fates of 3 particular souls. The Case of Harry Billings was built from the scraps of the unfinished film Scream Your Head Off. A drunk driver finds himself held captive in a psychiatric ward and then drafted to bring fresh young bodies to their operating tables. Nearly a decade after he started, Scream Your Head Off's original director John Carr would film extra scenes of his own and release the results as Marilyn Alive and Behind Bars. The Case of Greta Connor's segment was culled from the previously completed film Greta, with a greater focus on the Death Wish Club portion of that movie. A young man pursues the object of his desire into a shadowy underworld of high stakes. The producers paid for additional visual effects, most notably stop-motion effects. A minimum of 3 death traps are displayed in their glory. The Case of Claire Hansen comes from a feature film originally released as Cataclysm, about an immortal Nazi that owns a discotheque and the ordinary God-fearing folk that have to stop him. While this segment is at least as scattershot and mind-boggling as the others, this story has some of the stronger performances and most arresting images of the collection. And for those who pay attention to such things, John Cameron Mitchell's here. The performances of God and Devil are listed in the credits as Himself and Lucifer. In fact, the Almighty is played by Ferdy Mayne, who played the most fearsome of the vampires in Roman Polanski's The Fearless Vampire Killers. He also had notable performances in Frightmare and Conan the Destroyer. And although he passed in 1998, his name lives on as the moniker of an indie rock project. Satan, meanwhile, was portrayed by Tony Giorgio. In the first Godfather film, he was a member of the Tattaglia family, who ends up crossing Sonny Corleone. He also played the sheriff in the 1987 Bigfoot movie Cry Wilderness, another Visto Productions film. The acting MVP of this anthology has to be Richard Moll, for 2 distinct roles. In The Case of Harry Billings, he's a towering goth orderly who's very hands-on with his despicableness, while in the Claire Hansen segment, playing an atheist pundit, he relies less on his physical frame and lets his gravelly tones and gaze define his performance, both very different roles from his role as Bull the Bailiff on the NBC sitcom Night Court, which was a ratings hit at the time of release. You might think that abridging full-length stories would lead to more solid stories, but whenever these filmmakers had to make a choice, they chose the showiest scenes, the bloodiest, sexiest, most outrageous scenes. This movie was originally rated X in Great Britain. But all those details that build mood and reveal character tend to get left out, to the point that it almost punishes you for paying attention to the story. On the other hand, it's a collection of the bloodiest, sexiest, most outrageous scenes of 3 movies, a showcase of low-budget thrills and chills. If you're only interested in the frosting of the cinematic cake, this might be exactly the experience you're looking for. Just don't be surprised if it gives you a headache. If you're still on the fence about this film, it's easy enough to find this movie on YouTube or a cheap DVD, but if this really does sound like your cup of tea, Vinegar Syndrome has remastered the film for Blu-ray. Besides the audio and image definition upgrade, they've compiled interviews with several of the film's creators, and in the DVD extras, they include a copy of Greta, in case you wonder why she looked like Davy Jones of the Monkees in some scenes. Night Train to Terror has a lot of nostalgic love behind it, and it's easy to see why, with its focus on the most savory grindhouse cuts from three bizarre films, tied together with stacks of cheese in between. It's an 80s trash cinema feast for a certain type of fan.